you. Thanks for tuning into the Waiting List podcast. I'm Long Long.
I'm Daniel.
And I'm Jacqueline. And we are three watch friends with a healthy obsession for watches.
So sit back and relax with us while we chat with collectors, industry giants, and share some good vibes.
Hi, guys. Welcome back to the newest episode of the Waiting List podcast. I am joined today by my two co-hosts, Long Long and Daniel. And then on the other side of the screen, we have someone who, have been requested many times by our listeners throughout almost the 2 years that we've been doing this podcast. And it's Mr. Roni Madhvani. And we're so happy to have him on with us, and welcome on to the podcast, Roni.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm very humbled to be here. Thank you.
Whenever you thank people for inviting you, and you always say you're very humbled, and I always just think, well, like, you are one of the humblest person that I know, like, on Instagram. And I just think that, all the way when I was preparing this interview, I was thinking back to how we even met. And I remember, and I think I briefly spoke about this on our, one of the few Clubhouse chats that we had. I still remember very vividly. We were talking about something I can't remember, but then I was on the flight, and then how in the States there's free Wi-Fi on the flights, and then we were just chatting about nonsense. Like, you were telling me about home, and then I was telling you about how I'm here for school, and then the flight was about like 2.5 hours, and then we just ended up chatting throughout the entire flight. And I think that was one of the longest conversations I had on Instagram with like another watch person before I even was a watch person. So thank you. I just wanted to take this moment and kind of improvise a thank you to you, kind of just thank you for being there for me at the beginning of this, and when I was exploring how to be more involved within the community. And thank you for showing me your kindness and education, and I'm just so glad to call you a friend and mentor.
Oh, thank you for those kind words, and I'm glad we're part of a community now. Awesome.
Yeah,
thank you.
For sure.
Jack, if Roni was like one of the first collectors you spoke to, you really did start at the deep end then. Because I remember seeing Roni on Talking Watches, and before he blew me away with the spread, right, I was like, wow, he is a proper gentleman, the way he speaks. Yeah. He just blew me away with the language he was using.
So soft-spoken.
Yeah, and people say, I'm based in Shanghai, and people say I'm in Shanghai and think I'm a gentleman. I was like, just because I can speak some British English. But yeah, I feel embarrassed in a way.
Yeah. Well, let's get on to the interview. So for the first question, which is, I feel like it doesn't really make sense to ask this, but then just in case people who are listening who don't already know who you are, can you give us a very quick rundown of where you were born and grew up and where you're currently based?
Okay, very quickly, I'm a third generation Ugandan Asian. So my grandfather went to Uganda, which is in East Africa, at the turn of the last century. We were there for 100 years, and again, the quick education of the country. We had a dictator who came to power in 1972, and he woke up to a dream saying, well, if you're not an indigenous Ugandan, i.e., you're not a black Ugandan, you shouldn't be there, and you have 90 days to leave. So all 70,000 of us had to leave in 90 days, and we left and lived in exile. So I'm sure all of you have come across Ugandan nations. Most of them fled to the UK, to Canada, to the United States, very few to India. And so during that time, I was 8 when we were thrown out. I went to school in the UK. I went to university, to the London School of Economics. I was there until my second year, and then sort of my mom started selling off her jewelry to pay for my fees. And that's when I realized it's time to go back and earn some money. It's not right. She's doing that. And I brought that up actually because a lot of people think I'm a bit of a Scrooge when I buy watches and I negotiate the prices. But I think one's past always comes into one's thinking. And that's always at the back of my mind, actually. So I went back to Uganda. This is at a time when the country had been through 10 years of war. 1 million people had been killed out of a population of 8 million. It was really tough times, and there was a government change every 6 months. I started my own business. My family hadn't gone back. And I was shot and I've been wounded. My 2 friends in the car, they were killed. So I said, well, that was out there. So I came back and finished my last year at the LSE, over 2 years. And then I went back again when things were a bit better after that 2 years. So I've been there. I joined the family business after that. We used to we have several sort of businesses, and I looked after the brewery till we sold it to South African Breweries, which is now part of Anheuser-Busch. They're the largest brewer in the world. But I still live there, but less and less so. But I travel. So I basically travel, and I between Uganda, the States. I go to India because we have hotels there. So I live in a suitcase. But obviously during COVID, I got stuck for a couple of years, and probably rather too long. I got used to being stuck in London, but it's back to usual now. So that's the sort of background.
Right. So you're now based in London, and then,
No, in Uganda, Uganda's home. So it's traveling out of Uganda. But yeah, during COVID,
you're in London right now.
Yes.
Right.
Indeed.
And then, like you said, you haven't been really traveling due to COVID. And I remember having conversations with you about, how much you want to travel. But then I think you said you caught COVID actually. And that was kind of like.
I got COVID, and I've got what they call long COVID, which is a whole blur anyway in the medical profession. But my symptoms are I struggle with breathing. So the confidence kind of goes, especially when you travel, and unfortunately and sadly in Uganda, medical facilities are dismal. Even before COVID, I had my staff and stuff who passed away doing a road journey, and there's no oxygen in the nearest hospital. So it's not the place to be if you're sick. So I think it did a wobbly on my confidence to travel as much, but hopefully that'll soon pick up. And in terms of long COVID, and different people seem to have different, and they're now researching it. Before, every time I went to see a doctor, they kept saying, well, you're fine. And I said, no, I'm not fine. I can't breathe. And but now there's evidence that we're not all nutcases who do have it. It just doesn't come up on the usual scans and stuff. But anyway, that's enough boring medical stuff.
But the reason why I brought it up is because you just returned from a very exciting trip to Switzerland, to Geneva, and which is Watches and Wonders, and you did us, the favor of storing watches and the events, and then you were showcasing photos of other watch pals, and then just you kind of just enjoying everything. So can you tell us how was that? You went obviously with Cartier. Can you tell us a little bit about that overall experience? I'm not sure if it's like your first time there, or
so I was invited very, very kindly by Cartier, and I'm very thankful. I'd like to acknowledge that. This is actually the second trip where I was taken on the dog and pony show by Cartier. The first one being in, I think it was 2009. But that time they rolled out the red carpet, and it was like by their private jet and stuff. This time was pay as you go, and they paid for my accommodation. I'm not moaning or bitching, but I'm just saying it was different to the first time and this time. But having said that, it was a wonderful experience. I think to see the sort of the trade show, Watches and Wonders, I mean, it was kind of a better version than your American style watch dealers show. I mean, obviously you have all the big brands spending lots of money and stuff. The Cartier team were wonderful to see all their stuff. I mean, I did a bit of a walkies in the time I was around. I just found that if you aren't someone they know, you go as a mortal and stuff. I found a bit of arrogance with a lot of the brands and stuff. I don't know. I come from a part of the world, you don't judge people by how they look. I mean, I have people who may look scruffy, but they'll whack on my desk a dirty bag with $1 million, and they're my customers. Whether it's $1 million or $5, it doesn't matter. You don't judge people by how they look. So I think in this world of watches, at least at trade end. It's probably, I don't know, but I mean that's one thing I didn't really like, and I always speak my words, and I think I had a bit of a bitch and a rant about a couple of the brands, and I got a reaction as well from them. But if someone's not paying for my lunch, I think I'm entitled to say what I want, really. And that was just okay. So enough of the negative. So in terms of the positive, so that the show itself was, yeah, okay. They had all the new watches, and we can talk about them and stuff. But the highlights of the trip were for me. They organized a helicopter trip, which was a cool highlight. I'm not used to going by helicopter and all that. To the manufacturer. And next to the manufacturer, they have one of these old Swiss farmhouses, which they've converted into the métier d'art, where they make jewelry piece watches, not jewelry, but the watches that are embellished with jewels, and the sort of watches which have decorated like enameling and stuff. So that was actually wonderful. And there was, I think, three aspects there. One was to see how the process of enameling, how cloisonné enameling is done, regular enameling, and just, how, from the design, for the conception to the design, to how, individual people put together a timepiece, and to actually meet some of those individuals. So I think, in a lot of instances, we all wear watches, but there's no personification of what went into that watch on your wrist or who made it. And it's wonderful when you do meet someone who's put together the timepiece on your watch. It's strange. So on I don't know if I should say this, but anyway, part of the other guests who flew on the helicopter was this lovely couple from Canada, and the husband had a watch made by Cartier, I think from 5-6 years ago, and the lady who was the PR person at the métier was her husband. She met her husband at Cartier, and he was the engineer who designed this man's watch. So when she saw it, she got quite excited, said, "Oh, my husband, made that watch on your wrist." He was from North America, but he said he didn't. I mean, I'd be sort of chuffed to know, oh my God, there's the wife of the man who made the watch on it. But I think the reaction was not as euphoric as it should have been. But anyway, of course,
it's great that she even noticed like a watch that made, right?
But all us watch people notice, isn't it? I mean, the first thing I look at before shoes for men is on their wrist. I think we're trained to do that. Okay, so enough sort of waffling. So the processes and meeting the people was wonderful. And then they did this great little thing of actual doing some enameling. That was really cool. And I did my bit and stuff.
Was that your first time?
Yeah, I mean, you don't normally go in enamel dials and and certainly not in Uganda. But yeah, it was really, it was fun. It was interesting to see. I mean, I made a fool of myself, and it was just one blurb. And then I just pointed dots around the dial, and after it went in the oven at 800 degrees or whatever it was, it came out and looked cool. And it sits on my study with, and then they had an official photographer who came rather than my phone. So that was, and we got a white lab coat to wear with Cartier. So that was all cool. The other sort of experiences, there was two others I would like to mention. So one of the things they organized was for the team, the marketing team, and the ones who deal with the custom Cartier watches. They actually, I got to sit with them and the boss of Cartier London and just convey some of the issues, which I know a lot of my friends and fellow collectors have highlighted. For example, the absence of a policy when it comes to custom pieces. We're told one thing, then between ourselves and on Instagram, we see another thing. For example, the quantities. And when you're putting your hard-earned money to get something which is very, very special, you don't want to be learned subsequently, oh, there's going to be, you're first told there's 10 of them, and then you're told there's 75 of them, or this will change and that will change. So the message was that, look, manage the expectations of your customers. This is what I said to them. It's very easy. You're on a high now due to customers appreciating what you do, but it's very easy to destroy that. And it's important to be clear-cut and transparent with your customers and collectors. That was one message. The second message was, look, it's wonderful to churn out pieces from the past. And as I see it, Cartier is a design house, be it jewelry or watches, and they have a wonderful heritage. So what they've done is, from being in the woods producing big, ugly drug dealer kind of watches, they've gone back to producing, they've gone back to their heritage. So, which is great stuff. But you can't just do that. I mean, we've seen probably 5 versions of the asymmetric. You keep checking out.
Yeah.
Then you start getting a bit aware and say, "Oh, really? That's getting boring now." So I said, "Look, you've got to in between use. Let's see some. Let's have the creative juices flowing. That's what the brand's known for." So there was kind of like a nod towards that. Of course, by the way, this is a waiver. This is all my interpretation of what I said and what I know what I said, but my interpretation of what they took from me. So I don't want to say them to China, well, we never said this. So this is how I understood it. So it's important to just clarify that. So that was in terms, and it was really, it was quite, for me, I think, again, I was humbled that, there you have the whole design team of Cartier sitting and listening for an hour and a half or whatever to me waffle on. That was cool. And to listen on, not just go, and I felt it wasn't going in one ear and coming out the other, because they had to sort of, entertain me or pass time or whatever. But I felt that it was a good exchange of views. And, I went to that thing saying, oh, why can't they do exclusivity? And I've left understanding that, look, it's not possible for a brand. If you have, for example, a crash, how can it possibly be exclusive? Just because I have a black dial one with white letters, that can't be exclusive to me. The crash is a generic watch. The variables in a custom would be the dial color, the crown, or the color of the numerals. Or if you're fortunate and blessed, you're like Wei, you've got a luminous numbers. But as soon as he put that up, I think that 5,000 requests were luminous numbers. But so you've got to appreciate where they're coming from, and it's the same. When you design a watch, there's no point coming up with crazy things, because then if it's not within the DNA of the brand, they're unlikely to do it, and it's a waste of your time and the sales staff at your boutique or wherever you're engaging to say, oh, I want stars with marshmallows on the dial, because they ain't going to do it. You've got to do your homework. Part of doing a custom piece is to do your research and find out about the brand, what's in its heritage, and come up with a request that they would consider. So that's because that's another question. People ask, well, what's the process? And then again, that goes back to my original, where I started as requesting for a policy guideline. Is it that you've got to have spent, 10 watches, bought 10 watches in the last 10 years, or is it, you've got to tell what your great grandfather owned 400 Cartiers? I don't know. What is it? No one knows.
I think.
That's interesting, because that was actually one of my questions.
That was one.
What is the process? Because, clearly, Roni, you have the pieces. But
okay,
then
let me just talk about that. I mean, the process is simple. Is that you submit for a particular model which they're agreeable to do a custom piece. So at the moment, it can be anything, I guess, whatever they have. But again, they themselves aren't clear. You can go to one region, they'll tell you one thing. Another region will tell you something else. So, whatever it is, like crashes, I've heard it's 75 a year custom. It's only obviously white gold. They will not do custom yellow gold pieces, because the yellow gold is intrinsically owned in their mind to the heritage of the crash, which must emanate from London, because London was the originator of it. But again, there's no clear-cut sort of manual and stuff. So going back to the process is that you put in your application for it and giving your sketch. They'll come back with a rendition. Now they've been overwhelmed with requests, so it's long, but originally it was like 2 to 3 months for them to come back with the first rendition, if they approve it. Otherwise, they'll say, no, go back to square one, go to jail, kind of thing. So they'll come back with the rendition, you sign off or make changes, and then you put down a 40% deposit. You have 3 rounds of doing this. Again, this is not clear. Is it 3 rounds? Is it 2? But from what I know, it's 3 rounds. If it's more than 3 rounds and you're still not there in terms of an agreeable design that's agreeable to Cartier and yourself, then you go back to square one and apply again. By which time they'll probably block you.
I have a question. Okay, so if you ran Cartier and you could decide who gets the watches, who would you want the watches to go to? Are you deciding based on like how much you spend overall with the brand in terms of jewelry and watches, or do you think it should just be a case by case basis? Like, how much does this person like watches?
Well, I think it's a tough call. I mean, if you look at other brands, what is their requirement? You know, like it's a tough one. I mean, I think if you had to sum it up in one way, I think it should be how much passion one demonstrates for the brand. Is not everyone has the means to own 2 watches or 10 watches or 50 watches. You know, everyone's different, and you can only do so. How do you measure the passion of an individual? Is it looking at their Instagram, or is it? I mean, are you going to interview them? I don't know. Yeah, and it's really a tough call. So I think it should be. I'll never work for. I don't think I'll get a job at Cartier, but I don't know. That's where you started off, Taylor. But I don't know. And I think these guys seriously have a big job. I remember talking to someone at Paddock in London, and I said, well, it must be wonderful that you don't really have to make any effort. You have lines of people waiting. And he said, actually, it's not really. It's actually the worst thing, because when you have overwhelming demand and you have to say no to probably 95% of the people, every single one of those is going to be disappointed. And how do you manage people's expectations in terms of that disappointment? It's really a difficult job. So I don't know what the answer is. I think one has to be fair. I think there has to. I mean, as a collector, I don't think it's right that someone who's never collected a particular brand, and a lot of people want crashes because they've seen the premium that it's fetched at auction. So I've had many people say, "Oh, we'd love a crash. Can you help us get one?" I don't see why someone. And if you look at the numbers, so out of the original 67 London crashes, which were issued in yellow gold, I've seen, I think 3 have come back on the market.
No, more than that. More than that.
Well, I'm sure this is into auction and known what's gone behind the scenes. So that's not a good measure, and that's actually a measure of bad selection of who got those watches, I think, isn't it? And you look at, I've been dreaming of that enamel world. I have one. I'm not being greedy, but I'd like a yellow gold one, and I've had my name for 10 years. But you look on Chrono 24, and there's probably, I don't know, 50 of them there.
Yeah.
It's not every auction has them. So are they giving them all to the wrong people? What is it? I mean, I wear mine on safari, in a hot air balloon in Africa. I do wear mine, and I always joke, theory, look, I'm wearing my watch. It's not like I'm not just sitting in the safe. I'm going to flip it. So
I think I personally think that there must be a selection of people that are getting allocated pieces because of the buying power, and those people are actually treating it like a business anyway. So they're doing the math on, I buy the stock that you need to shift, in place of getting those hot pieces that I can later then flip and make my money back, because that's what the brands do as well.
Well, maybe, but okay. Anyway, the other third sort of the third experience was that they'd arranged at the top of their Geneva boutique to take out a collection of their vintage wristwatches, and it was that was, I think, the best part of the trip for me, because to touch and feel, you could to hold and see the pebble, you could see the original London crash and stuff. And they also had a little presentation on the mystery clocks, which was lovely, and they took out 3 of those clocks. But to see the wristwatches, which is that crowned the whole trip. So that was wonderful. We were allowed to take pictures, but we were told we can't post them. But when I came back to London, I saw about 3 people posting. I don't know if they'll be excommunicated, but I didn't have the balls to do that. And out of respect, because I said I will not. I would not do that. So that was wonderful.
You can send it privately to us.
and risk my relationship. But anyway, so all in all, it was a really great trip, and I'm thankful to Cartier for all those inside. The actual, what's it called, Watches and Wonders. Okay, fine, but the other
You were
things
there, yeah.
were
You were there
more
with Cartier. You were there with the team that you were familiar with, and that's
yeah,
what-
and then and the lady who sort of has been instrumental in putting my collection, the Philippa in London, she was there with us, and great. It was everything was fabulously absolutely no. I could find no fault, and I'm someone who moans all the time about everything, but it was a good, well organized and stuff.
For sure. I guess, while you were saying that, I just had one thing I wanted to say before we move on to the second question, which is, now, first of all, I completely agree with what you said. I don't have the relationship. I mean, I know Philippa, but we've never met, right? Like, I don't have the relationship with the team at Cartier like you do, but I think it's great and it's very professional of them, and they should be listening to collectors like you who've had such a long relationship with the brand and clearly has your own place in the collecting community. So when someone like you tell them, and I think I remember seeing one of your posts and I couldn't agree more. I think you posted a photo of your platinum cintre, and then off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact wording, but you said, well, isn't it funny that like a regular production platinum cintre now is considered more rare because there's so many unique executions of the watch that was made in such a short amount of time. So how much does Cartier or like a brand think of their term exclusivity when they're just basically?
Yeah, absolutely. I posted that a week before going to, and I thought my invitation would be cancelled actually, but it did cause a bit of a rumpus. But it opened eyes, because I think that got them to say, let's meet this guy.
It's too much. Yeah.
In Geneva, and I think that's why I'm saying that if one has to say something, it's important to speak out and say it. I mean, I've done lots of other pieces. I can't, so I said, well, I want to enjoy them, and said, well, the answer has been, well, don't wear, if others see it and they come with the same request, or you post on social and they come, we won't be able to deny them making that. So I said, well, what do I do with the watches, lovely watches you've made? And these are not just your standard, ones with dials where change colors. So they said, well, sit at home and enjoy them. So I think I'll have to just sit at home and enjoy the watch, which is, I think, sad, and I do find that annoying.
Yeah,
But,
no, I get what you mean.
it's fine, it's okay.
Yeah, I think they need to take it down a notch. I think let's just speak the blatantly like obvious truth here, which is basically, for a long time, Cartier watches weren't being very appreciated, right? And it was only the last 2 or 3 years where, well, really like last 18 months since the crash auction results, did people start realizing just how great the design aspect is with these watches. I mean, when we first spoke, like I was asking you about questions about the crash, and it seemed like there were still availabilities with the original London crash, and nobody really even knew. Or
yeah, I remember there was about 4 unsold, and then everyone said, I said, I'll introduce you to Philippa, send her an email and take it.
Yeah, and that was the most normal thing. Like that was the most straightforward process. I really liked the watch. There ended up having to, still be taking orders. I emailed her and I was able to get on the list, and they were still taking orders back then because the 67 weren't sold out yet. And all of a sudden, like within the last 18 months, it kind of just blew up, and everyone now kind of want it. And then I think from a brand perspective, again, I completely agree with what you said. It's the hardest thing to turn people away, but also I think it's the brand's role, and they should do their part in, looking at the person who's requesting it and seeing like, do you really want it, or do you want to be one of the 3 who, get the watch and just flip it immediately? And
it's a tough call, but that's part of their marketing a brand. Yeah, part of it.
For sure.
And I think what social media and the internet has done is it's made customers it's made customers very savvy in terms of knowledge.
Yeah.
You can't hoodwink them anymore.
No.
So that's number one. And I think even the brands, if they wake up to that and use social media, you can do your homework on people.
Yeah.
I know a lot of brands, are researching auctions to see serial numbers and who is it who flipped a watch we gave them. So they can do it if they want to. in the same way, if someone comes to buy something from you, you can do your homework and see, is this someone who's passionate, or is he a flipper? I mean, everything's possible. But as custodians of the brand, that's their job to do it. And yes, it will result in disappointment for some customers or some alleged customers, but that's the cost of doing it, I think, if you want to preserve your brand integrity.
For sure, for sure. I want to move on to the next question, which, you've kind of become synonymous with interestingly designed case shapes when it comes to, wristwatches. And, very famously, your Hodinkee episode, Hodinkee video. And I just wanted to ask you, like, what attracts you to these watches? Because I know you look at them from a very design-oriented perspective. So, like, what was the original piece, if you can remember, that was like, oh, wow, I need that. Like, that is something new that I haven't seen yet. And that piece kind of started this whole lineup of you being kind of just in the hunt for these interestingly shaped case watches.
Sure, I don't think from day one it was, I like interesting shaped watches. But I mean, if it was a choice between a regular round watch and a funny shaped one, by default and from within, I would choose the funny shaped one, because I think if you scratch below the surface, it's probably an interest in the arts and in the arts really. And so, I see a wristwatch is almost like an artistic rendition of something on your wrist that you can walk around with. You can't put a painting on your forehead or something, but a wristwatch is there and it's a piece of art. I think that's the bottom line. In terms of when did it start? I mean, as I said, from day one of getting a watch, it's not obviously not when I was 15 or something, but from 18 or so, when you sort of start developing awareness, it sort of, grew from that. And, I'd buy watches on eBay, Lecoultre watches for $200, $300, and they'd make great shaped watches, Hamiltons and stuff. And I always tell people, look, you don't have to spend tons of money to get into the passion. We all started somewhere, and it's a good idea. And in fact, it's probably a good idea not to spend too much to start with. I had a young kid yesterday who sent me a private, it's my 18th birthday. And what watch do you recommend? I said, to be honest with you, I'd say don't buy a watch, because at that stage in your life, you should be thinking of saving money to get your own apartment or something. I said, I know you don't want to hear me, but that's the truth. And then he came back and said, you're right. So. And I say, if someone's gifting it to you, fine, then it's okay. But if you're saving your hard-earned money at 18 to buy a watch, that's dumb. Watches will always be there. You can buy them later. It's not a big deal.
Yeah. I think sure, Dan, go ahead.
I just read an article that you have it was about Gilbert Albert, and it seemed that you had a very strong affection for this designer who, for those that don't know, designed a few pieces for Patek in the 1950s, very strongly shaped, quirky designed watches that went away from their original design language. Why out of this watch designer? What makes him so special in your mind?
Yeah, it was seeing an old Antiquorum catalog. It was called Fieldman Habsburg, actually, from 1999. And there was one of these Patek Philippe watches, and that stuck to my mind, and did some homework. There was no internet then, certainly no internet in Africa. But anyway, I wouldn't even dream of owning a Patek Philippe then, but 10 years later, or whenever it was, it sort of, I did my homework, and strangely enough, the first Patek I bought, which was from, was that. And it was an Italian dealer. Yeah. Actually, sorry, I lied. I forget, I'm getting old. So the first one was just a normal Calatrava with a spider's dial. It was, I think, about $3,000 or something. I bought it in the States. And then this one was the first, the Gilbert Albert was the first sort of proper sort of Patek, I'd say. And it was an Italian dealer, Alex Ciani. He's probably, I think, one of the most knowledgeable, trustworthy dealers, and a true gentleman. So he gave that to me, and of course he came with the watch rolls with lots. And when you see all that, and he had a jumper, the 3969, for the 150, and he had that, and he says, "Oh, if you like that as well, keep that." I said, "I don't have the money to pay for, two. I just saved up enough." He said, "No, you can just keep it and pay for it." And this is before Google, and you could Google someone and find out and stuff. So the fact he trusted me and stuff, and a lot of Indian jewelers, family jewels, they'll say, "Well, if you like this jewelry, keep it, and you can pay for it later," kind of thing. But in Europe, it's not heard of. But
yeah, I was going to
but
say that doesn't happen to
yeah,
me.
no, but Alex did it, and I always remind him of what 40 years later. Do you remember you did that for me? So that was cool. I always remember him for that.
Yeah, and I think it's great that when you finally met Gilbert, you got him to sign.
I didn't actually meet him, so I did my
Oh.
hounding. I wrote to
How did he
him.
sign it then?
So I wrote to him and said, "Look, I have a few of your watches, and would you mind signing on the extract?" So one had the original. So of course I got back the sort of Swiss reply saying, "Well, we'll have to get permission from Pere Philippe." I felt saying, "Well, it's my certificate, it's my watch. What's it got to do with them?" But anyway, they did eventually. So after a long 6-8 months, I got
to get a signature.
my certificates signed it, and sadly he passed away. I think it was 2 years ago. Yeah. So it's lovely to have, the certificates, the archives rather, are signed by him. That's a cool thing. And I kept the visiting card and the letters, the exchange of letters. It just makes a nice story.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, that's what makes collecting, huh? You don't really hear stories like this these days.
Absolutely.
Actually, I heard another story. Well, I read another story about certain watches being found in a wall. I think it was
okay. So we all have this obsession that we want something straight from the original owner, but and we all dream about it. So this was a dealer who said it was a Universal. So it was from 19. It was a pre-war Universal. It's just but it had a very austere sort of dial, and it was in mint condition with the original tags and stuff, and it was found, I think, in Hamburg or Berlin, hidden away. So you always think, well, what, must be in someone who the war was happening, what happened, and they put it into the house. Well, I don't know. It's something for the imagination.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, and again, like for those who
there's another story like that. Actually, this is a recent one. So I have this Vacheron cornucopia, which is this sort of, it's quite from the 50s, with these lugs on either end, and on the back is this inscription Dolly, and the year 1954 and the month. And I always thought it's a men's watch. Even then, why would it be called Dolly? I mean, it's and I posted it with on the back with this, and sure enough, someone in New York, there's this gentleman who's probably the most sort of expert on Cartier, vintage Cartier jewelry. And so I should mention his name. I saved it. I know his name, but his Instagram I can never remember. And basically he came back. He says, "Well, actually, I know who that Dolly was. He was an Austrian Jewish jeweler who, when the Nazis took over in Austria, he fled to America, and his name was Adolf. And of course, in America during the war, it wasn't a good idea to be called Adolf, and he was known apparently within the Jewish American community. His name was Dolly, and he worked on 47th Street, and that was his watch. So that solved my mystery, and it just makes that watch even more fascinating for me.
I hope that happens to me, like once in this
those
watch
are the
collecting
kind of
journey.
stories that I love to hear about and stuff. So I'm just looking for his account. It'll come up. I'll look for it. Sorry.
Sure. No, I think that's like, what are the chances of that happening, right? And then like,
well, I think that this is where Instagram's amazing. I mean, I found there's so many stories. Like each watch has a story. I can talk till the cows come home. But there was another. I found the first waterproof Cartier it's from the early 20s. And it had an inscription on the back, and the dealer who sold it, he had a picture of the extract from the archives, the Cartier archives, giving the case number and the movement number, and it was everything ticked, and the inscription was, and it was a soldier who fought in the American Expeditionary War in 1917. The Americans joined in 1916, So he must have gone to France then, and he must have bought the watch at the end of the war. I think it was 1919, before he came back to America, and he gifted it to his son-in-law. But all the family have passed away since. And I got Charlie books on time.
Yeah.
So he did the research. He's amazing. So we all talk to each other. So I don't know how he does it. So he found the family in, I don't know which state in America, and they didn't exist anymore, and stuff. So it was a wonderful watch to have, you know, and the story of the American serviceman going to France to fight, and then buying this watch and taking it back to America and gifting it to his son-in-law. So I did buy it, but unfortunately things didn't stack up, because when I was again doing my Instagram runs, I found that same watch with another dealer, a small-time dealer, but there was a difference in the dial. It didn't, at that time, it didn't have Cartier written on it, called the movement.
Right.
So I went back to the one I bought from and said, look, I'm not happy because it's not the same. The dial's been, Cartier's been added subsequently.
Right. Right.
I passed on that. I not passed. I returned it and got my money back. But
Right.
this is just an example of, with a bit of homework, and to, you know, you can almost bring watches back to life again, and having access to social media and stuff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I wanted to ask a question, which is, you know, again, for people who are listening to this, is kind of like a feast for the years if you're a collector, right? Because this is very much collector talk. You know, over the more than 3 decades that you've been collecting, obviously you've, you know, had come across many amazing watches, but are there any regrets that?
Oh, of course, we all have them. I mean,
And
there are
can you
times
tell us some of them?
where there are times when I didn't have enough money, and you know, there's regrets like, oh, you saw something, but you never could afford it. So that's not a real regret, because we all dream, and that's good to dream. So, but if it was something that you could have afforded if you didn't eat for a year or something, that's, I think, does it regret. And if you you know, if you sold it and then have regrets selling. So there's so many pieces, and I think each one of us will have a story. There was I remember I had a lovely stainless steel Rolex Prince from 1930. It was a jump hour. I part exchanged it for a Patek, which I didn't have the money to buy the Patek, and so I sold it. And then it was even featured on these lovely Italian coffee table books on Rolexes. It was on page 3. So it was a real, you know, piece to brag about. And then I found it. It was in Japan. It was sold for thrice what I did. I saw that. In terms of not buying, I remember seeing a enamel dial, a cloisonné enamel Vacheron, with the Starbucks logo. I think it's Melanusa in Greek mythology, the lady, the mermaid. So there was a dial, and it was offered by this French dealer who stayed in Hong Kong. He was married to a Chinese lady, and it was at that time about $30,000. It was a lot of money, and I hummed and hawed, didn't buy it from him. He consigned it to Bonhams, and it was sold for, I don't know, 55 and stuff. But I really regret that. That's something which I always think maybe the CEO of Starbucks has it or something. But you know, so all these kind of things, you'll never, if you don't take the opportunity that one time. Another one stuck in my head is, I remember I bought a Patek. I saw it, and it had these initials, His Imperial Majesty, HIM, and it had a logo on the back, and I recognized it was Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, and it was an Italian dealer. So basically, Haile Selassie had a Ethiopian pilot, and he gifted him that Patek Philippe. And you know, that became the original box and everything, and I kicked myself for that. I sold it for nothing, and I don't know why I sold it, because it was just a boring Calatrava. I never wore it, and I thought, well, what am I going to do? But suddenly now watches with inscriptions, and that would be worth, I don't know what, forget the worth, but to have some pass through your hands, that was a shame.
Mm-hmm. And what's
there's a point, actually, I just want to bring back, actually, which is the engravings. You know, a lot of collectors, when they look at watches, any inscription, they will not consider those watches, right? They want it clean. They don't want anything like that. What's your interpretation? Obviously, you think it's okay, right?
Well, it's changed. When I first started, I wouldn't want that either. But I think now if it's a vintage watch, that's part of it. I mean, someone asked me, well, where is it acceptable? Where? I mean, if it's a modern piece with an engraving, and you can buy many of the same watch, well, why wouldn't you just get one without the inscription? But if it's something that's quite rare and difficult to find, or even possibly unique, if you take it, because you're not going to see that again. I've just got a couple of watches. They all have inscriptions. So it'll be homework to do who they were and stuff, but it's fine. And I think that adds to the beauty of the watch to me. It's almost like the watch is speaking out to you, if I don't sound too nutty.
No, well, you have that combination of the artistic side, which you clearly value, but then that historical side even more, because these pieces are made in history.
Yeah, and they're part of history, and they're almost like, if they could talk, imagine what they tell you.
Actually, that leads very nicely to my next question, which is, if your watches could talk, what would they say about you, do you think?
Leave us alone, you madman.
I think they would say, thank you for putting me with such esteemed company, with all the other watches.
That's a good one. How many pieces do you reckon you have currently?
I have two answers. Not enough. And I'll tell you a story. So from Uganda, when we were thrown out, I was put in boarding school in England, and you sit on these long tables where you have to talk to your housemaster. I wasn't familiar with what English customs were. So if you sit at the end, the housemaster is the one who's serving you the food.
Yes.
And what do you do talking to him for that 20 minutes? So I asked him, well, how much do you earn? I was 8 years old from Africa. He turned around and said, well, I don't ask you how many wives your father has. That's the answer you're looking for.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, which is like, I see on your Instagram that your daughter is also, just had her birthday recently, and then you gave her a very nice watch on a very nice strap. Sorry, that's my cat. And then I just wanted to ask, like, what does she think about this hobby of yours? I mean, she obviously grew up with it, right? Like, at what point did
I don't think she's been sort of keen. She has one watch. She likes the Vacheron Mercator, but she's not really keen on what. It's just recently, in the last 6 months, suddenly there's been some kind of an awakening. I don't know what the reason is. But she's always, and I don't even know, where my watches are. Sometimes I live in different places. Sometimes I hide them in pockets of shirts and I can't find them, and I sort of panic, if it goes to the dry cleaners. So she's been urging me to sort of try and catalog it, and put, just write down everything. So I know in top of my mind, but if something happened, I think everyone would struggle to find out anything.
You are in the middle of cataloging, right? Because I've seen that
I've started. When she's pushed me, I sit down and write down. I said, well, okay, I'll do it. Like I left school typing with one finger, so everything takes ages for me. So if you want me to do it, you sit, and I'll tell you which year it was made and what the
that is a great excuse. I should use that. I left school learning to type with one finger. Right.
Yeah. What did you want to ask, Dan?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, have there been any periods of stagnation in your watch collecting where you were there was a period of time where you fell out of love with it, and then looking for a new direction or anything like that?
Well, I think no, not in terms of the passion for it, but in terms of acquiring, yes, because it all boils down to your means, and not everyone's earnings and means are constant. And I think what I know for sure is that over time, your greed sort of increases, and you want more and more expensive things, and I've reached to say, well, I can't afford the stuff, so I've been buying other brands. Example being, 3-4 years ago, I just found there was there was nothing available. Quality was not available, and more importantly, the price was expensive. So I looked into vintage Audemars, and they're wonderful watches you could buy for $3,000, $3,500. So I went on a bit of a mad spree, buying those. Those same watches have now doubled or tripled. So, but I've got a nice collection. I think it's a nice collection. So yeah, so the rate of acquisition is a function of your disposable income, I think, really.
Mm-hmm.
But
And
the passion may not wane. Sorry.
Well, just following up on that, like I just wanted to ask, like, what still excites you now? Because at this point, I mean, you've seen
Everything. I dream about watches, of finding watches, and one of the reasons I spend so much time on Instagram is it's been meeting different people, attaining further knowledge, sharing knowledge. That's the amazing part. And also, I dream every morning, and in that inbox, private message, that someone's going to say, "Oh, look, I've got this. Would you be interested?" So that's got to be. I wake up to that. That's a big, exciting moment every morning.
Have you actually bought from someone who reached out to you via private DM?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
That's great.
And from all parts of the world, there's a lot of trust involved, and also you become a little savvy in terms of making judgments and stuff, and quality and stuff. But yeah, very much so.
That's great. That's great. I wanted to ask, like, you know, for someone, because on our podcast we actually have a lot of young listeners who are just getting into the hobby, and I would say, you know, while most people are interested in mostly modern pieces, but given the crazy amounts that modern watches are demanding these days, a lot of people are looking at vintage, and for good reason, I would say. What would some of your advice be for, you know, young audiences who are looking into perhaps exploring the realm of vintage watches?
I think only go on that journey if it calls you, and when and if it progressively leads you to that stage. I don't think it's something that, because someone said look into vintage watch, go and look into. I think it's a minefield. There are a lot of and what is a vintage watch at what stage? If a replacement dial, the condition, it's not like going into a shop and buying something. So I think you need to be thorough in terms of your knowledge and research. And the beauty, I think, of something like Instagram is most collectors are very helpful, and they will help you if you ask them questions before making a decision. But to whether to go into vintage or not, I think that should come from within. And when it does come, be discerning, and further your knowledge before making the plunge in anything. But it's not. I don't think it's a lot of young people. I understand that it's not the calling for them, and I understand why. It's something that which will come. If it's going to come, it'll come naturally. Don't sort of bring it upon yourself.
Okay, so you guys heard it there. And just off the top of my head, would you consider, like, I don't know, the 3940 or actually the 3970 to be vintage, or would you consider them to be?
Yeah, in my mind. So in terms of the paraphilic range, it's strange. Like 10 years ago, I knew every reference. Not the modern ones. I could really, but now, sort of, as I get older, I can't remember things. But so for me, the era ended with the 3970, 3940, and the 5004. And then after, there were one or two pieces. So I see this sort of, so I'm blessed to have, the 3940, 3970, 5004, and I'd love the repeater, the 3974, and that would make my pack of cards. But there's no way I can afford that in this lifetime unless I go to Vegas or I win the lottery. So I'll be content with what I have.
We'll see Roni like next week in Vegas at a table, blackjack tables. What are you doing? I told you I need to go to Vegas.
3974.
What attracts you about a 3974?
Everything. It epitomizes what paraphilic stands for to me, and it's in terms of the complication. To be a minute repeater is, it's a sum of everything. I mean, there's some complication like the chronograph. I see no value. I don't like it because it has. It just, for me in Africa, everything's like late, and everyone keeps saying be patient. So I've said this story. I mean, you may have read it. Is that they're waiting at an office of a minister or something who's late for 5 hours, 10 hours. And all you do is look at your clock. When's this man going to come? And you keep pressing your chronograph button. That's the only use I think you can have for a chronograph. Or how long the food will take. But otherwise, what use is something like it? I don't understand. So it's not, anyway, seriously, it's not, anyway, horses to courses, but it's not a chronograph. Not, I don't like, and I see no value to.
Yeah, but minute repeaters, on the other hand, you can just play that button all over.
Imagine you'd be sitting in that,
just
in
play
that,
it.
in the secretary's little office, and you have the soldiers with the dark glass, and you can go ping, ping.
Well,
Tilly says I want it, and you have to take it off your wrist.
well, if you need help booking tickets to Vegas or something, like, I'm sure, you know, don't say it too early. I'm sure, you know, because you have the 3940.
No, I'm hopeful. I even go and pray every morning, but not for a watch, but I should bring that in.
Yeah, if you could find, I don't know if this exists, but, you know, I from what I've read about the 3974, they made the standard dial variations, which, you know, reminisces of the 3940, but then they also made some unique.
The highlight would be a black dial Breguet now, so it matches with my
really
004. Yeah, so that
I was gonna say maybe a yellow gold one with a champagne dial, because that matches your 3940 and also your 3970.
It's all dream stuff, so it's whatever.
Yeah,
it's gonna come, but.
Yeah, but yeah, I was reading, I mean, from the time of this recording, you know, yesterday, A Collected Man released the article, which, you know, they quoted you on the 3970, and then you said that you actually found the Michael Ovitz one sealed, and then when you bought it, you just cut it out.
That's what it's for, isn't it? I don't know what's the point keeping it in the seal.
Yeah.
I had to sell many watches for that, so there's a story in that. So I think it's about 4 watches I parted with. It was at a watch show, and I bought it from none other than Bob Maron.
The Ovitz, you sold for watches for the Ovitz.
So one of the ones I sold was the Regulator. It had just come out, and there was a waiting list, and you know, I was one of the chosen few who was given the blessed to buy it. So of course I needed to sell stuff, so I sold it, and I got, you know, I sold it. I part exchanged it. And then 2 years later, I walk into Patek Philippe, and they said, "We're annoyed with you." I said, "What's happened?" They said, "Oh, you sold one of the watches you were given." I said, "Which one?" And this is 2 years later. So they said, the Regulator. And I said, well, after I did that purchase, I had the sort of foresight to send an email saying that, look, I've sold it, but I bought one of your own, because, you know, vintage means more to me. And 3970 was my dream. I had a normal one. I had to part exchange that as well for that Ovitz one. But the fact that I'd sent an email, I was let off the hook. Otherwise, I would have been excommunicated and high and dry. So.
Yeah. Which one came first? Was it your unique 5004 or the 3970?
The unique 5004. So for that, again, Patek Philippe took me to the manufacturer, and on the way back, you know, everyone makes banter, and I said, well, my dream watch would be a black dial Breguet numbers. And Ed Butland, who is the director for the UK, he said, leave it with me, Ronnie, and I'll see. And then 2 years later, he said, I've got some news for you. And then so I got that, and my what is it, the world I forget the number, the world time enamel dial. So both came at the same time, and I thought, shit, where am I going to pay for these 2 watches? It's so much. I seriously, I'm going to mortgage my house or what? I didn't want to say that. So anyway, so I broke into my entire savings and paid for those 2 watches.
It's a very valid point you raised, though, because now when you get watches, even modern pieces, you don't know when they're going to come, right? It's not like they tell you, you know, and then if you've just bought a piece.
You just get that phone call, and then you have your clock's ticking. Are you interested, you know?
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask one last question before we move on to the quick fire, I guess, which is I want to ask, like, just very, very briefly, and this is kind of like something that I've always wanted to ask, which is, you're currently doing an execution of, like, kind of like your own watch, the Jump Hour. I don't know the name, but it was inspired by the pocket watch, the Jump Hour, with the
It's called a Wandering Hour, where
yeah.
it's from a breguet designed by a guy called Cart. I've forgotten his first name, Cart. Someone wants
Right,
to Google it.
right.
Yeah, so I'm
So
working
how's
with.
that going? That's my question.
It's a year and a half late. I WhatsApp him every week saying what's happened. But I'm from Africa. I'm patient. So it's okay. Anyone else would have said, we've had enough. But everyone was saying, oh well, if it looks really good, would you do it commercially? And the answer is no. I wouldn't want to put anyone else through it.
Yeah.
And imagine having taken them put some money in advance. Oh my God, I'd be slashing my wrists in fear of walking out of meeting anyone who had paid in advance.
Yeah, and they're probably not as patient as you because you're from Africa.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's quickly move on to the quick fire questions, which are 10 questions that we came up with. Which is, are you ready? And just the first thing that comes off the top of your head. Okay. Next travel destination.
Back home to Uganda.
Oh, really? What is it planned, or do you have any?
No, it's part of the going home kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be there for a few weeks, then I go again, start traveling. So
that's nice. How do you pick and choose your straps? Because you're kind of famous for your strap pairings on Instagram.
Okay, my preference, I feel what looks best on vintage is unstitched, unpadded, and matte finish. And croc, blacks and browns with a lot of texture as possible. That's my criteria. The guy I use is in Vietnam. I've mentioned him lots of times. He's really good. I think I've got him like over 500 customers. He gives me free straps even these days. He's reduced the price, but he charges $100. Takes 1 week to make, and you can go to these fancy ateliers or whatever they call themselves in Europe, who make you wait for 2 months, 3 months, charge you €300. But this guy's really good.
How did you get him to make your crash strap? Because that takes a really specific measurement.
No, the crash I've always got from Cartier. So before getting delivery of the watch, I've said I would like an unstitched, unpadded matte finish. So specify that. I mean, if they're selling you a big one, they all run around to get you one little measly strap the right way. So don't be shy to ask what you want from the manufacturer.
Right. Must visit place if any of us go to Africa.
Uganda. We have the gorillas. We're so green. The weather's beautiful. We're on the equator. It's unspoiled. It's uncommercialized sort of safaris. Anyone interested? Reach out to me. It's a great place.
Yeah. Favorite safari animal?
Probably gorilla.
Gorilla?
Or gorilla and elephant, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love elephants. The last movie that you've watched?
Oh, during this, I don't really watch TV, to be honest. I was forced to kind of watch it during lockdowns, but I can't even remember the names of any of them. Because literally, I just watched them, and if you ask me next day, I can't remember. I don't know any of the actors. I don't know. It's just useless. I have the news on more than watching movies.
Yeah. Your favorite meal?
I love spicy food. So I love Thai food, Indian food, parts of Chinese food. Anything spicy I love. I also love fried food, like fried chicken.
Who doesn't?
Fish and chips.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't like fancy restaurants, so if someone wants to take me out, take me to good food. That means more to me.
Like more like traditional cuisines and authentic.
Well, it doesn't have to be a fancy posh restaurant to try and impress. I'd rather go where the food's good.
You collect a lot of art and tribal art items. Where do you find like your inspiration normally? And this could be anything, like not just in watches, but just inspiration in life. Like, do you get inspired by art, or do you get more inspired by
I think beauty in it, in whatever form, appeals and talks to you. So I love Art Deco, but pure Art Deco is difficult to live with. So there's elements of Art Deco are blended with sort of modern modernity makes it a soft Art Deco. For example, that's how, in terms of furnishings and stuff. Yeah, so it's such a personal thing. I don't think there's a particular genre I'd say, it falls in. I mean, if it's art, I remember there used to be a time when I'd travel, wherever I'd go, I'd try and pick up a painting as a memento of where I've been. And they weren't necessarily, they were $500 or $1,000 or something, but then I sort of outgrew that. And I thought, well, I've gathered a whole lot of junk, is that appropriate? But yeah, I think art is something that talks to you on an individual level. And if it does, go for it.
And last question, which is, sometimes I have a good laugh just looking at your stories from your replies to people sending you DMs. If you had to pick, like, what's aside from the how much, the for sale, like, what's like the funniest DM that you've received, or like the DM that like made you roll your eyes the most?
Oh my gosh, I get so many every day, and I try and answer them. So I just feel that
I know you try, and you try to answer them. That's the thing.
I do answer all, because I think if someone's taken the time to write to you, they should. They deserve to be written back. But the dumb ones, I think. You get all these sort of ones from females from all over the world, and then they start off. Obviously, I know this hi. What do you collect? And I thought, well, I said, look at the page. So sometimes I've written ornamental ducks. But then by the second line, I thought, what am I doing? I'm being stupid. Block and delete.
That's funny. What do you collect? How many for sale messages do you think you receive in like a day?
These days it's less. It comes by season and what the item is actually. But at least 2 or 3 a day.
That's what, and again, Roni's very patient. So if any of you guys are listening, feel free to send him a message and ask how much his watches are. He'll respond. Okay, guys, that's the end of the episode. Thank you so much, Roni, for sitting down an hour with us. It's been an absolute blast. And for those of you guys listening, please follow him on his Instagram account and check out, all the interviews that he's done. He's done with, Hodinkee, Revolution. So feel free to check those out. And stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye. Thanks for having me. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
As always, thank you for listening to the Waiting List podcast.
We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. And if you have any questions,
comments,
or feedback,
feel free to reach out to us at the Waiting List Podcast on Instagram or via our private accounts.
We'll see you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.